Welcome to Heartbreak Chronicles. Early summer sunlight slanted in through the window, tinting the living room a warm golden color. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday afternoon, and Ethan Mitchell stepped into his home with fatigue hanging over his shoulders. He has been out of town for the past 3 days attending construction safety training and is looking forward to spending quality time with his family when he gets home. The moment he pushed the door open, however, a strange silence filled the air. Ethan walks into the living room and sees a picture that makes his heart almost stop. His wife Audrey, his mother Eleanor, his two sons Matthew and Noah, and his best friend Peter Callahan, all sitting on the couch, staring at him with stony expressions. The atmosphere, like a family member waiting for the results of an operation in a hospital, was oppressive and full of anxiety. "What's wrong?" Ethan asked, a sense of foreboding welling up in his mind. Matthew, his oldest son, 17, got up from the couch. The formerly sunny boy had a twinkle in his eye at the moment and seemed to have trouble looking his father in the eye. "Dad, please sit down." Matthew's voice was much lower than usual. "You need to accept a new reality. You're not in charge of this family anymore. Uncle Peter is more like a father to us now." At that moment, time seemed to freeze. Ethan felt a wave of vertigo as the blood rushed to his head and his ears buzzed. He looked around and saw his wife, Audrey, with her head bowed and her fingers twisted uneasily together. His youngest son, Noah, at 14, with red eyes. His mother, Eleanor, with a face full of anguish. And Peter, the man he had once regarded as a dear friend, with a look of serenity, even as, deep in the recesses of his eyes, Ethan caught a glimmer of triumph. Anger burned in Ethan's heart. They all know. Everyone knew. And he was the last to learn the truth. Ethan left the room without a word, not even closing the door behind him. He walked straight to the garage and started the car to leave the place he had once called home. The next day, by the time they realized the retaliation Ethan was preparing, they already had 30 missed calls. But it was too late. After checking this area, we'll be back next week to make sure all the fire equipment is up to standard. Ethan Mitchell quickly jotted down the last few notes into his notepad, then looked up at his young colleague beside him. Lawrence, a 20-something inspector in training, nodded. "Mr. Mitchell, you really pay attention to detail. When it comes to building safety, details are life." Ethan smiled and patted the young man on the shoulder. "That's all for today. Have a great weekend." Ethan hung his helmet in the back of the car and casually straightened his shirt collar. He looked at his watch, and it was exactly 5:15 p.m. Not too late. Just in time to pick up some ingredients and prepare a nice dinner for the family before you get home. Driving past the local supermarket, Ethan carefully selected fresh salmon, pasta, and a variety of vegetables. He'd been married to Audrey for 18 years, and he still remembered that look of appreciation on her face every time she cooked. Although she was the real artist in the family, Ethan's little talent for cooking always caught her eye. Returning to his home in a suburb of Columbia, Ethan parked his car in the tidy driveway. It is a double-story detached house with a small garden and backyard, which they purchased 10 years ago. Through hard work and careful budgeting, they've paid off most of their mortgage, built up some savings for their two sons' college educations, and even supported Audrey in pursuing her artistic dreams. "I'm back." Ethan pushed the door open and walked into the kitchen carrying 2 large bags of groceries. The kitchen was empty, but he heard talk and laughter coming from the backyard. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he saw Audrey and her 2 sons on the back patio. Noah is drawing while Matthew is fiddling with his cell phone with his headphones on. Audrey was sitting on the edge of the patio, a glass of red wine in her hand, talking into her cell phone with the kind of big smile Ethan hadn't seen in a long time. "Hey, everybody." Ethan pushed open the back door and stepped out, gesturing to the bag in his hand. "I'm going to make pasta with salmon tonight." Noah was the first to run over and give his father a hug. "Awesome. I'm starving." Matthew took off his headphones and nodded in greeting. "Hi, Dad." Audrey ended the call hastily, setting the phone aside. "Ethan, you're back. I'm talking to Olivia about the show next week." Exhibition. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "You finally decided to show your work at her gallery?" "Not exactly." Audrey's eyes twinkled with excitement. "Peter set me up. His new downtown development has a great lobby space that he wanted to decorate with works from local artists. He especially liked a couple of my abstract paintings, so he invited me to do my first show." "Peter." Ethan put down his grocery bag. Peter Callahan? Yeah, it's your friend from college. We reconnected last month at the art show at Noah's school, remember? Ethan certainly remembers. Peter Callahan, their friend from college, has been quite successful in real estate in recent years. Last month, he appeared at the Noah School Art Show as a sponsor representative. Peter exchanged a few pleasantries with Ethan before being dragged off by the principal to meet the others. Ethan didn't think he'd have any contact with Audrey. It's good news, Ethan tried to sound sincere, that your talent is finally being recognized by more people. Thanks, Audrey smiled, but her eyes drifted slightly. By the way, I may need to spend more time in the studio, catching up on a few new pieces. You don't mind taking charge of the house a little more these last few weeks, do you? Of course you don't mind, Ethan smiled. Like I've always said, your artistic endeavors are just as important. At dinner, Audrey was more animated than usual, rattling off ideas for the exhibition and plans for the future. Ethan listens quietly, nodding or making suggestions from time to time. He loved seeing his wife so passionate. It reminded him of when they met as young men. Audrey was an art school student, idealistic and creative. Ethan, on the other hand, is an engineering student, down-to-earth and detail-oriented. They were two very different souls who met and got to know each other at a school art festival. Ethan admires her creativity and sensitivity to beauty, while Audrey is impressed by his down-to-earthness and respect for her art. Looking at his excited wife in front of him, Ethan felt a hint of warmth that had been missing for a long time, and at the same time an inexplicable twinge of unease. He couldn't pinpoint where the unease was coming from. Maybe it was because of Peter's sudden appearance, maybe it was because of that unfamiliar gleam in Audrey's eyes, or maybe it was simply because of the change itself. After dinner, when the kids had gone to their separate rooms and Ethan was tidying up the kitchen with Audrey, he asked tentatively, "This exhibit really means a lot to you, doesn't it?" Audrey stopped what she was doing and turned to him with a complicated glint in her eyes. "Ethan, you know I've always wanted more people to see my work. It's not just an exhibition. It's a chance for me to prove that I'm more than just an elementary school teacher and a stay-at-home mom." "You've never been just that," Ethan said earnestly. "You've always been a talented artist in my eyes." "Thanks," Audrey said softly, but her expression revealed a hint of complexity Ethan couldn't quite understand. "But sometimes I need validation from other people, especially those who really understand art." That night, Ethan lay in bed, listening to Audrey's even breathing, his thoughts unsettled. He was happy for his wife, but at the same time, a sense of foreboding haunted him. Something important was quietly changing, and there was nothing he could do about it. Over the next few weeks, changes began to creep in. Audrey's schedule is getting fuller and fuller. In addition to teaching and family time, she spends almost all of her free time creating or interacting with people in the art world. She began to attend more social events, sometimes not returning home until late at night, with the aroma of red wine and a look of excitement. Ethan did his best to support her, dropping off and picking up the kids, taking care of the household chores, and even putting off a couple of out-of-town jobs to make sure the family was functioning properly. He told himself that this was only temporary and that once the exhibition was over, everything would be back on track. However, Audrey's behavior becomes even more puzzling as the exhibition date approaches. She became indifferent to family matters and reacted coldly to Ethan's concerns and inquiries. Her cell phone was always set up with a new password, and she often walked to another room while on a call. One Saturday morning, while Ethan was in the kitchen preparing breakfast, Audrey hurried down the stairs, dressed in a carefully matched outfit and more elaborate makeup than usual. "Going out so early today?" Ethan asked, placing the omelet on his plate. "Well, there's a meeting with the curatorial team," Audrey replied briefly, barely glancing at him. "Don't wait for me for dinner. It might be late." "Working with Peter again?" Ethan tried to make his tone sound casual rather than questioning. Audrey stopped and turned to him with a slight frown. "Yes. Is there a problem?" "No problem, just..." Ethan weighed his words. "You've been seeing a lot of each other lately." "It's work, Ethan." Audrey's voice took on a decidedly defensive tone. "Peter's in charge of this project, so of course there needs to be frequent communication." "I understand." Ethan nodded. "Just want to make sure everything goes well." Audrey took a deep breath as if restraining some sort of emotion. "Ethan, I know you care about me. but sometimes you have this. Protectiveness can be suffocating. I'm not your construction project and don't need your security clearance. Her words were like a knife, stabbing right into Ethan's heart. Before he could say anything, Audrey had turned away, leaving him standing alone in the center of the kitchen, skillet still in hand. Matthew came down the stairs and saw his father frozen in the kitchen and asked in disbelief, "Dad, what's wrong?" Ethan forced a smile. "Nothing. Come and have breakfast. Do you and Sophie have a date today?" The diversion worked. Matthew began to ramble on about his and his girlfriend's plans, while Ethan tried to concentrate and listen, trying to put Audrey's words and antics behind him for the moment. However, as each day passes, the distance between Ethan and Audrey seems to grow. The two who were once close are now like strangers living under the same roof. They no longer share the little things in life, watch movies together, or even have those late-night chats. This change not only affected the two of them, but also began to affect the entire family atmosphere. Matthew became quiet and often locked in his room. Noah became more clingy and seemed afraid of losing something. Until the night that changed everything. Ethan was called in for an urgent building safety issue that was expected to require overnight work. He sent a message to Audrey, but received no reply. It was after 11 o'clock at night when the problem was solved early and he decided to go home. The house was dark, except for an unfamiliar limousine parked in the driveway. Ethan gently opens the door to his home, not wanting to wake his family who may be asleep. However, a whisper from the living room stopped him in his tracks. "It can't go on like this." It was Audrey's voice, with a softness and intimacy Ethan had never heard before. "The kids are already suspicious." "Then tell them the truth." A male voice replied, and Ethan immediately recognized it as Peter's. "Audrey, we can't hide in the shadows forever. You deserve a better life and someone who truly understands you." But Ethan, he was a good man, a good father. Nice guy doesn't equal the right partner. Peter's voice was soft and firm. "You know I know you better than he does and appreciate your talents. Look at the changes you've made these past few weeks. Your work is full of new energy." "It's not a coincidence, Audrey." Ethan felt a wave of dizziness and had to hold onto the wall to steady himself. Despite his internal premonition, hearing the confirmation in person still sent a sharp pain through him. Instinctively, he wanted to rush in and question them, but years of rational thinking habits restrained him from the impulse. He quietly exited the house and returned to his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. Over the next few days, Ethan maintained his calm on the outside while struggling fiercely on the inside. He begins to watch Audrey's every move, gathering evidence and trying to sort things out. He notices that Audrey gets messages on her cell phone all the time, and she always smiles involuntarily when she reads them. He noticed that she had begun to wear a new perfume, one that he had never given her. Crucially, he noticed that particular tone and look she had when she mentioned Peter, a way she had once shown only to him. One afternoon, when Audrey goes to pick up Noah from school, Ethan finds a small sketchbook at home, casually placed on a kitchen cabinet. As a husband who respects privacy, he would not have gone through his wife's personal belongings, but things are different now. The sketchbook was full of sketches, mostly landscapes and abstract shapes. But on the last few pages, Ethan found several portraits of Peter. Those lines are full of intimacy and familiarity, each stroke revealing the depth of the painter's knowledge of his subject. Next to one of them is a quote, "In your eyes, I see what I really want to be." In that moment, Ethan understood. His marriage wasn't just in trouble, it was at an end. Audrey isn't just attracted to Peter's position and resources. She's genuinely in love with the man. What makes Ethan's heart ache even more is that when he thinks back over the past few months, all the signs are so obvious, he just hasn't been willing to admit it. Audrey's estrangement, mood swings, sudden obsession with art, frequent outings all point to the same fact. She's emotionally leaving him. The night the exhibit opened, Ethan decided to see it for himself. Without telling Audrey, he drives alone to Peter's construction project. The venue was richly decorated and Audrey's work was carefully hung in the most prominent spot in the lobby. Ethan stood in the corner and watched as she maneuvered through her social circle, laughing and talking with confidence and energy. Peter stood beside her, touching her arm or waistline lightly from time to time, and the closeness and naturalness of it sent a tingle through Ethan. What shocked him even more was that Matthew was actually present, talking and laughing with Peter. His oldest son, the teenager he was so proud of, was listening eagerly to Peter's account of a certain business idea with admiration in his eyes. Ethan eventually left the venue quietly, without going up to say hello. On the drive home, his mind was in turmoil, with anger, sadness, and a deep sense of betrayal intertwined in his mind. Over the next few days, Ethan began his own investigation. He's not trying to save his marriage. That ship seems to have sailed away. But to understand the full picture of what's going on and to protect his future and that of his children. He first contacted a longtime colleague and friend, Vincent Torres, who happened to be working as a consulting engineer on one of Peter's projects. Peter Callahan. Vincent frowned. I don't like talking about work in private, but since you asked, there are some gray areas in this man's business tactics. He knows how to cut costs without obviously breaking the rules, if you know what I mean. Like what? Ethan pursued. Vincent lowered his voice. For example, using substandard materials, forging some safety test reports, and bribing some minor officials to speed up the approval process. Nothing big enough to land him in jail, but enough to get him in trouble if something goes wrong. This information made Ethan think. As a veteran building safety inspector, he knows how dangerous these types of practices can be and how to spot them. Ethan then decides to talk to his youngest son, Noah. During a solitary lunch, he cautiously asked, Noah, how's everything going these days? There's been a bit of a change in the atmosphere at home, and I want to know how you feel about it. Noah lowered his eyes and fiddled with the food on his plate. Mommy's happy. Yes. Well, she smiles more than she used to. Noah looked up with an insight in his eyes beyond his years, but not because of us. She's always looking at her cell phone and smiling, or smiling when she's with Uncle Peter. Ethan's heart tightened. Does Uncle Peter come to the house often? Sometimes, especially when you're traveling, Noah shrugged. Matthew thinks he's cool because he's got a lot of money and has agreed to hook him up with some business school people. But I don't like him much. Why? Noah thought for a moment. He pretended to like my painting, but his eyes weren't smiling. And he's always interrupting, even his mom. Children are sometimes far more perceptive than adults. Ethan thought to himself, grateful for Noah's candor. Finally, Ethan decides to confront Matthew directly. He chose a Sunday morning when Audrey had taken Noah to a drawing class, and only he and Matthew were home. Matthew, we need to talk. Ethan knocked on the door to his son's room. About Peter Callahan. Matthew's expression was immediately alert. What about him? I'd like to know what you think of him, and if you've noticed anything between him and your mom. Relationships. Matthew was silent for a moment, then sighed. I'm not stupid, Dad. I know there's something between them. How long have you known? Suspicions started a few weeks ago, confirmed at the exhibition last week. Matthew's voice trailed off. They thought no one would notice, but I saw them embracing in a deserted corridor. Not a regular friend kind of hug. Ethan felt a pang of heartache, not only for himself, but for his son having to deal with this situation. Why didn't you tell me? Matthew smiled bitterly. I don't know what to say. And Peter is really connecting me with some internships and college recommendations. He understands what I want, unlike. He stopped abruptly. Not like me. Ethan asked calmly. Matthew hung his head. I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't mean that. It's okay to say what you really think. You're a good father, but you're always too cautious, too much by the book. Peter says the business world requires a spirit of adventure and networking, not just hard work. The words stung Ethan, but he forced himself to remain calm. Matthew, you have a right to your own thoughts. But remember, there is a difference between superficial polish and true character. The conflict finally erupted on an ordinary weekend. That morning, Ethan was notified that he needed to go to a 3-day construction safety training. It wasn't the first time he'd left home for work, but this time, he was filled with inner turmoil. Audrey acted unusually calm about his departure, even a little relieved. As he packed his bags, she stood in the bedroom doorway and, in a rare move, initiated the conversation. Ethan, we need to talk. Ethan stopped what he was doing and turned to her. About what? Regarding our future. Audrey took a deep breath. I think we both realize that things aren't what they used to be. Yes, Ethan replied calmly, especially since Peter reappeared in our lives. Audrey's expression froze. It's not just about Peter. And what's that about, Audrey? Is it about you no longer being satisfied with the status quo? About how you think I don't understand your art enough? Or about you looking for a new thrill? You don't understand. Audrey's voice held a hint of annoyance. This is about me finally finding my true self, finding people who can appreciate the real me. And what have I done for 18 years? Ethan asks rhetorically. I'm not supportive enough of your career? Not enough respect for your talent? Tell me, Audrey, what have I done wrong? You did nothing wrong. Audrey suddenly raised her voice. That's the problem. You were always so perfect, so rational, so predictable. You support my art, but you never really understand it. You see the colors and the composition, but not the emotion and the soul of it. Ethan felt a wave of deep exhaustion. So that's your reason for cheating? Because I'm not artistic enough? I didn't. Audrey started to deny it, but her voice trailed off under Ethan's calm, determined gaze. It's complicated, Ethan. No, it's simple. Ethan shook his head. You're in love with another person and have betrayed our marriage. The only thing that complicates it is that you don't want to admit that you've done something wrong. Tears glistened in Audrey's eyes, but Ethan wasn't sure if it was out of guilt or annoyance at being poked and prodded. When you get back, we need to talk about future arrangements. Ethan didn't respond, just silently finished packing his bags and left the house. As he drove to the training location, his mind was in turmoil, but one thing became clearer. His marriage had come to an end, and he needed to prepare for the storm that was to come. During the training, Ethan was outwardly focused on the course content, but inwardly he was thinking about how to deal with the crisis at hand. He knew he didn't want to have an ugly confrontation, didn't want to victimize his children, but at the same time, he couldn't just quit without a word and let Peter easily take his place in the family. On the last day of training, Ethan received a call from his mother, Eleanor. Ethan, I don't know if I should tell you this, Eleanor said with worry in her voice, but I think you have a right to know. Peter moved into your house today. Ethan's heart sank. What? I went to drop off Noah's painting kit that he forgot at my house and saw Peter's car in the driveway with a couple of suitcases. Audrey looked embarrassed, but Matthew told me it was a new beginning for the family. Eleanor paused, her voice becoming angry. That guy actually has the nerve to sit in your seat like he's always belonged there. Ethan closed his eyes and tried to stay calm. Thanks for telling me that, Mom. Please don't worry, I'll take care of it. After hanging up, Ethan felt a wave of anger and betrayal like no other. Not only Audrey's betrayal, but Peter's shamelessness and Matthew's backstabbing. He had planned to go home tomorrow, but now he decided to end his training early and go back tonight to face this ridiculous farce. On the drive home, Ethan's anger cooled and was replaced by a calm resolve. He doesn't vent, he doesn't yell, he doesn't do anything impulsive. Instead, he will, in his own way, make all betrayers realize what the consequences of the choices they make will be. When Ethan finally pushes open the door to his home and sees his family and former best friends sitting around the living room, he has a full understanding of where he's going next. This is the scene where the story begins. Ethan standing in the doorway of his living room, facing his wife, his mother, his sons, and his best friend, Peter, and hearing his oldest son, Matthew, say the words that pierced his heart. Dad, please sit down. You need to accept a new reality. You're not in charge of this family anymore. Uncle Peter is more like a father to us now. Ethan left the room without a word, a plan already in his mind. As night fell, he checked into a nondescript motel and began his preparations. Early the next morning, he contacted a reputable attorney, detailed the situation, and began preparing the divorce papers. He then went to his bank and adjusted the account privileges to ensure that Audrey would still have access to basic living expenses, but not to their major assets and savings. Then, the most crucial step, he reached out to several influential friends in the construction industry, especially those associated with Peter's project. He made no reference to personal vendettas, but merely objectively expressed concerns about the safety standards of certain programs and expressed a desire to conduct an informal assessment. Later that afternoon, Ethan's cell phone began to vibrate constantly. First Audrey called, then Matthew, then Peter, and even Noah called. He didn't answer any of them, just silently kept track of the number of missed calls. When the number of missed calls reaches 30, Ethan knows his message has gotten through. Not through words, but through actions. What he was trying to tell them was that betrayal had a price. and it was a price they would soon learn for themselves. Because at that very same time, several building safety inspectors were conducting unannounced inspections at the site of Peter's flagship project, and the information provided by Ethan was guiding them to enough safety hazards to put the project on hold and subject it to a full investigation. The storm is just beginning. Ethan Mitchell sits in a cramped motel room on a stormy night, the laptop screen in front of him the only source of light in the room. The occasional flash of lightning outside the window illuminated the side of his stoic face, mapping the storms within a man's heart. 30 missed calls. This number has been increasing over the last 24 hours, mostly from Audrey and Peter and a few from the kids. Ethan's mother, Eleanor, is the only person told of his whereabouts, but she is also asked to keep the secret. They deserve to worry, Eleanor said indignantly over the phone. That woman, how dare she treat you like that and bring that vixen into the house? Mom, please don't say that in front of the kids, Ethan responded softly. No matter what happens, Audrey is still their mother. You're always like that, Ethan, too considerate of others. Eleanor's voice softened. But this time, you need to fight for yourself. Fight for yourself. The concept is almost foreign to Ethan. His career as a building safety inspector has been dedicated to the safety of others, and his home life as a husband and father has been dedicated to the well-being of his family. Now, faced with the collapse of his life, he needs to think for the first time. What is best for him? Ethan opened his email and a new message caught his attention. The sender is Grant Collins, Deputy Director of the Regional Building Safety Authority, and the title is simple and straightforward. Preliminary Investigation Report on Callahan Development Projects. Ethan took a deep breath and clicked on the email. Mr. Mitchell, based on your report, we have conducted an initial inspection of 3 ongoing construction projects at Callahan Development. Unfortunately, your concerns are confirmed. We found multiple serious safety violations including, but not limited to, the use of substandard building materials, falsified safety test documents, and non-compliant electrical system installations. Of particular concern is the Lakeview Plaza project, for which we have issued a moratorium and will conduct a full investigation next week. Given the seriousness of the violation, the matter may be referred to the Office of the Prosecutor for further action. Thank you for your professionalism and concern for public safety. Please stay in touch. We may need your further professional advice. Sincerely, Grant Collins, Deputy Director, Regional Building Safety Administration. Ethan closed his email and leaned back in his chair, feeling a mixture of emotions. It was not joy, nor the thrill of victory, but a heavy confirmation that he had been right. Peter Callahan is unethical not only in his personal relationships, but also in the professional arena. Just as Ethan was contemplating his next move, his cell phone vibrated again. This time it was a text message from Matthew. Dad, please call back. Mom was devastated and Noah cried all the time. Peter is having some trouble with work and the atmosphere is tense. We need to talk. It was the first message that wasn't accusatory or demanding, and Ethan could sense the worry and confusion in his son's tone. He hesitated and decided to reply. Matthew, I need some time alone. I love you and Noah very much. Please tell him not to worry. As for the problems between adults, we'll find a solution. After sending this message, Ethan turned off his cell phone. He needs to keep a clear head and not be swayed by emotions. No matter what happens next, he must remain calm and rational, just as he does when faced with an emergency at work. The next morning, Ethan arrives at the lawyer's office. Diane Reynolds is an experienced divorce attorney and the wife of Ethan's college classmate. Her office is located in a nondescript downtown office building with simple but professional decor. Based on the information and evidence you've provided, we have good grounds for filing a petition for divorce based on infidelity, Diane said after reviewing the materials Ethan had brought with him. But I have to warn you that it can be a tough road, especially when it comes to child custody. I don't want to hurt the kids, Ethan said firmly. I just want a fair outcome. Fairness, Diane repeated the word thoughtfully, is often the hardest thing to achieve in a divorce case. But I will help you in any way I can. They discussed issues such as property division, child custody, and visitation. Ethan made it clear that he didn't want to take away Audrey's role as a mother, but he needed to make sure that he wasn't marginalized in his children's lives. Regarding Peter Callahan, Diane asked as the conversation drew to a close. Did your report on him have anything to do with a personal vendetta? Ethan looked her straight in the eye. Every violation I reported was backed up by solid evidence. If you're asking about my motivation, yes, I admit that personal factors prompted me to look more closely at his project. But I have not falsified or exaggerated any facts. Diane nodded, seemingly satisfied with the response. It's important, Ethan. In the process that follows, your behavior must stand up to the strictest moral scrutiny. After leaving the law firm, Ethan decides to visit his mother. Eleanor lives in a retirement community about 20 minutes from Columbia City. Since Ethan's father died 5 years ago, she has moved there to live with a group of like-minded retirees. They found their way here, Eleanor said as she poured tea for her son. Yesterday afternoon, Peter came knocking on my door with Audrey in his flashy limo. What did they say? Ethan asked, taking the teacup. Peter played the peacemaker and said it was all a misunderstanding and they were just trying to solve the problem peacefully. Eleanor scoffed. I told them that in my dictionary, the act of stealing someone's husband or wife and then calling it a misunderstanding is called despicable. Ethan couldn't help but smile. You really said that? Of course, I'm not as good at controlling my emotions as you are, Eleanor said as she sat down across from her son. And then Audrey started to cry, saying that she never meant to hurt anyone, that she was just following her heart. And I told her that adults shouldn't use following your heart as an excuse for betrayal. Ethan sighed. Mom, while I appreciate your support, things are complicated enough as it is. I know, son. Eleanor reached out to take his hand. But I can't stand by and watch them hurt you and pretend I'm a victim. Especially when Noah told me that Peter was trying to get him to call him Dad. What? Ethan's head snapped up. Did Noah agree to this? Of course not, Eleanor soothed. The boy sees better than his brother. He tells Peter that he already has a dad. Peter looked upset, but didn't force him. The news was both relieving and heartbreaking for Ethan. His youngest son remains loyal to him, but the 14-year-old is being forced to deal with such complex family dynamics. I need to see the kids, Ethan resolved. Not in that house, but somewhere neutral. Eleanor expressed her understanding. You can invite them to my place on weekends. I'll hang out and give you guys some privacy. Thanks, Mom. On the way back to the motel, Ethan's cell phone rang again. This time it's Audrey. After much internal struggle, he decided to answer it. Ethan, Audrey's voice sounded tired and strained. We need to talk. Yes, we do need to. Ethan responded calmly. But not now, and not over the phone. Did you know that Peter's program is being investigated? There was accusation in her tone. You did this, didn't you? Ethan paused for a moment, then replied bluntly. I was just reporting a security violation that I found. As a building safety inspector, it's my responsibility. You're being vindictive. Audrey's voice rose. You know what this means to him, what it means to us. We. Ethan repeated the word with a hint of bitterness in his voice. It's funny how you use we so naturally when talking about you and Peter. And when it comes to our marriage, the word disappears. There was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. Then Audrey said in a lower voice, I didn't mean to hurt you, Ethan. The thing is, it happens. Things don't just happen, Audrey. People make choices, and then things happen. You chose to betray me. You chose to let another man into our home. You chose to demean me in front of our children. These are choices, not accidents. You don't understand. Audrey's voice took on a note of frustration. I've tried to explain, but you always reduce everything to right and wrong. Life isn't your building code. Ethan, there are no clear boundaries or checklists. Maybe you're right, Ethan said calmly. But one thing is certain, our marriage is over. I've contacted an attorney and you'll receive the paperwork shortly. About the kids, I hope to see them on the weekend. I'll make arrangements with Matthew. That's it. 18 years of marriage, and that's the end of it. No, Audrey. Ethan's voice was smooth and firm. The end was the moment you decided to betray me. Now we're just dealing with the consequences. After hanging up, Ethan felt a strange calm. Saying those words and acknowledging the end of the marriage was a lot easier than he thought it would be. Maybe it was because, deep down, he'd long since accepted that fact. The weekend is fast approaching. As planned, Matthew and Noah arrive at Eleanor's house. When Ethan opens the door, Noah immediately rushes forward to embrace him, while Matthew keeps his distance with a mixed expression. I missed you, Daddy, Noah said, his voice catching a little in his throat as he hugged Ethan tightly. I miss you too, little one, Ethan said as he hugged his youngest son back, feeling the warmth and comfort of the embrace. After guiding the kids into the living room, Ethan realized he didn't know how to start this conversation. Fortunately, Matthew broke the silence. Peter's company is in trouble, he said bluntly, and he says you tried to sabotage him. Ethan took a deep breath. Matthew, I need you to understand something. I'm reporting real safety issues that, if left unaddressed, could jeopardize the lives of the people who use those buildings. As a safety inspector, that's my job. Right after he was with Mom? Matthew retorted. That coincidence is too convenient. I understand your skepticism, Ethan said calmly. But the fact remains that Peter's program is a serious safety hazard. My personal feelings may have prompted me to look more closely at these programs, but I have not fabricated any evidence. Noah interjected. Peter keeps saying you're jealous of his success, and that's why you're doing this. He said that to you guys? Ethan frowned, trying to control his emotions. Boys, I'm not going to say anything bad about Peter or your mother here, but I want you to understand that the adult world is complicated, and sometimes people make choices that hurt others and then try to justify their behavior. Matthew's eyes twinkled with skepticism. Then why don't you go home? Why don't you work things out with us, with Mom? Because some injuries, once inflicted, cannot be easily repaired, Ethan replied matter-of-factly. Your mother chose a different path, and I have to honor that reality while protecting my dignity. So you're getting a divorce? Noah asked, tears in his eyes. Ethan nodded. Yes, Noah. I've contacted my lawyer and prepared the paperwork. So what do we do? Noah's voice quivered. Who are we going to live with? It depends on a lot of factors. Ethan explained as best he could in a way the kids could understand. But the most important thing is that no matter what happens, I will always be your father and will always love you. Your mother loves you just as much. That's not going to change. Matthew was silent for a moment, then asked, What about Peter? Will he be staying at our house? I can't control your mother's decisions, Ethan replied honestly. But I want you to remember that true fatherhood is not determined by who lives where, but by who truly cares for you, supports you, and loves you. The conversation lasted nearly 2 hours. They discussed school, friends, hobbies, and possible future living arrangements. Ethan tries to avoid showing negative feelings towards Audrey or Peter and focuses on reassure the kids that his love and support is always there. As the conversation drew to a close, Matthew asked a question that Ethan didn't expect. Do you have a plan? Over. You know, life after that. Ethan thought for a moment. I'm looking for a new place to live and will probably apply for some new job opportunities. But most of all, I hope to continue to be an important part of your lives. Even if I said those things on that day. Matthew lowered his head, remorse in his voice. Words about Peter being more of a father? Ethan walked over to his son and gently placed his hand on his shoulder. Matthew, you were just stuck in a complicated situation and didn't know how to react. I don't blame you. But I hurt you. Matthew looked up with tears in his eyes. I saw the look on your face when you left. Yes, it hurt, Ethan said matter-of-factly. But as a father, it's my job to understand and forgive, not hold grudges. You will always be my son, and nothing will change that. These words seemed to break down some kind of barrier. Matthew suddenly stood up and gave his father a tight hug, the first time he had done so in a long time. After dropping off the kids, Ethan felt both exhausted and fulfilled. This conversation, while difficult, was a necessary first step toward a new family dynamic. Back at the hotel, Ethan receives a message from Vincent Torres inviting him to lunch the next day. As a consulting engineer on Peter's project, Vincent may have more insider information to share. The next day at noon, Ethan meets Vincent at a nondescript cafe downtown. Vincent looks more nervous than last time, constantly looking around as if he's worried about being followed. Thanks for meeting me, Vincent said, lowering his voice. Things got a little complicated. What's wrong? Ethan asked, while noting Vincent's unease. Peter Callahan knows it was you who reported his program, Vincent said bluntly. And he's furious, and I don't think he's going to let you off easy. Ethan frowned. What's he going to do? He called an emergency meeting of the top brass yesterday, Vincent explained, and I was invited to attend in my capacity as a technical advisor. He has publicly stated that he wants to make that self-righteous safety pay. He implied there were ways to influence your work and reputation. He can try, Ethan said calmly, but my record has always been clean. The thing is, Ethan, Vincent moved closer, his voice lower. Peter has connections in building management. He implied that certain people could be allowed to do a special review of your work history to find any possible flaws or errors. This information gave Ethan a twinge of unease. As a veteran safety inspector, he has always been guided by the principles of professionalism and integrity. But in a career that has spanned 15 years, there have inevitably been decisions that have blurred boundaries or situations that could be misinterpreted. I appreciate the warning, Vincent, Ethan said eventually, but I'm not going to be intimidated by threats. If Peter wants to play that game, he should remember that I know no less about the construction industry than he does. Vincent nodded, seemingly relieved. I just thought you should know. Also, one thing you might be interested in. Peter's Lakeview Plaza project, that major project that was called off, was actually collateral for his massive loan to the bank. If the project is delayed or canceled for an extended period of time, he could face a serious financial crisis. This information really piqued Ethan's interest. If Peter's finances are unstable, that could affect his relationship with Audrey, which in turn could affect divorce negotiations and the children's living arrangements. After leaving the cafe, Ethan headed straight for his office. Despite his temporary focus on dealing with his personal crisis, he still has work to do and reports to write. However, when he arrived at the office, the mood was decidedly off. The eyes of his co-workers flickered, and the chatter stopped abruptly as he entered. His department head, Sandra Reeves, waved him into her office. Ethan, Sandra closed the door with a serious expression. I've just been informed from above. You are temporarily suspended pending an internal investigation. What investigation? Ethan asked, despite having a guess in mind. There have been questions about several of your past projects, Sandra explains, specifically about your inspection reports for the Westfield Business Center and Oak Ridge Residential. They imply that you may have signed a security certificate without sufficient checks. Ethan couldn't help but sneer. That's convenient, right after I reported Peter Callahan for a violation. I know it sounds suspicious, Sandra agreed, and I personally think the allegations are baseless. But the procedure must be followed, Ethan. You must leave temporarily until the investigation is complete. Ethan nodded in understanding. He knew it was Peter's revenge, a means of intimidation and threat. But he is equally aware that his work has been strictly to specification and well documented. These so-called allegations will eventually prove to be unfounded. As he left the office, Ethan received a call from his attorney, Diane. There's news, Ethan. Audrey's attorney contacted me and they want to negotiate. Negotiate what? Apparently Peter's finances have suddenly become less stable, Diane said with a hint of triumph in her voice. And Audrey is offering to keep the family home, but is willing to make concessions on child custody and property division. Ethan thought for a moment. Tell her attorney that I don't want the house, but I want joint custody of the kids and a fair visitation arrangement. Regarding the property, we can divide it according to the prenuptial agreement. A prenuptial agreement would be very beneficial to you, Diane reminded, considering you had much more assets than Audrey when it was first signed. I know, Ethan said, but I don't want to make this divorce more complicated and painful. I just want to make sure the kids are well and that I have a place in their lives. After hanging up, Ethan realizes that the ball has begun to bounce, despite Peter's attempts to hurt him through professional retaliation. As the investigation progresses, Peter's business empire is faltering, which in turn affects his relationship with Audrey. Over the next few days, the situation continued to evolve. Ethan's internal investigation proceeded swiftly, and the allegations quickly proved to be unfounded due to his detailed work record and the testimony of multiple co-workers to back it up. He was reinstated and even received a formal apology from the department. Meanwhile, the investigation on Peter is going deeper and deeper. Not only the project that was initially reported, but regulators began a comprehensive review of all his projects under construction. More and more irregularities are being discovered, and the media is picking up on the story. The very day Ethan was reinstated, he received a text from Audrey requesting a meeting to talk. He agreed, choosing a centrally located cafe as a meeting place. Audrey arrived earlier than the appointed time, and when Ethan walked into the cafe, he found her already ordering 2 coffees and sitting in a corner seat, waiting. She looked much more haggard, and that light that once shone in her eyes seemed to have disappeared. "Thank you for wanting to see me." Audrey spoke, her voice softer than usual. Ethan nodded and sat down across from her. "What do you want to talk about?" "First of all, I want to apologize for my actions." Audrey looked him straight in the eye. "I hurt you and betrayed our marriage, and that's unforgivable." Ethan didn't respond immediately, just watched her quietly. It's the first time Audrey has shown sincere remorse since they separated. Secondly, Audrey continued, "Peter and I, it's over." Even though Ethan had expected this, hearing it in person still left him with a mixed bag of emotions. "Why?" he asked simply. "Because he's not the man I thought he was." Audrey smiled bitterly. "When the pressure is on, when his career is threatened, he becomes a different person. He started blaming me, saying that if it wasn't for me, he wouldn't be involved in this mess. He even suggesting that I should use our relationship to convince you to withdraw your report. So he just used you," Ethan said calmly, "and discarded you when you were no longer valuable." "Not exactly." Audrey shook her head. "I think at first, he was really attracted to my art and personality. But when faced with a choice, he chose his own interests over our relationship. It made me realize that what I had been chasing was a fantasy, a perfect partner that didn't exist, not a real person." Ethan was silent for a moment, then asked, "Do you regret it?" Audrey's eyes glistened with tears, every second. "Not just because of the ending, but because I hurt you and the kids. I let myself believe that our marriage wasn't enough for me anymore and that I needed more. But now I realize that the real problem is me. I've been looking for external recognition and excitement and ignoring the value of what we already have. It's important to recognize that," Ethan said, no accusation in his voice, just a calm acceptance. "But it won't change what's already happened." "I know," Audrey nodded. "I don't expect your forgiveness or for us to go back to the way things were. I just want you to know that I take full responsibility for my actions. I will honor your wishes regarding the divorce and the children's arrangements." They continued to talk for nearly an hour, discussing the details of the divorce, division of property, and child support arrangements. The whole process was much more peaceful than Ethan had expected. There was no finger-pointing, no arguing, just 2 adults trying to deal with a broken relationship with respect and understanding. As she leaves the cafe, Audrey suddenly asks, "Ethan, did you know that's how it was going to end from the beginning? You saw this coming when you reported Peter's program?" Ethan paused and thought for a moment. "I knew Peter had problems in business, and I knew he would face trouble once those problems were revealed. As for how your relationship will develop, I don't foresee it, but I do hope you see him for what he is." "You know more about human nature than I thought," Audrey said softly. "I always thought you focused on facts and rules and ignored emotions and intuition. But now I realize that you see it more clearly than I do." "Everyone has their strengths and blind spots," Ethan responds. "And one thing my job has taught me is that apparent perfection often hides the most dangerous flaws." The next few months will be a time of adjustment and rebuilding for all. The divorce proceedings went relatively smoothly. Under the agreement, Audrey retained the family home, but Ethan was granted joint custody of the children and a generous visitation arrangement. The division of property was also agreed upon, with Ethan agreeing to more generous terms than the prenuptial agreement, given Audrey's need to maintain the children's current standard of living. Peter Callahan's situation is much more complicated. As the investigation progressed, more and more of his violations came to light. Several projects were ordered shut down, several banks began to withdraw their loans, and his business empire began to falter. Ultimately, the prosecutor's office decided to file a criminal complaint against Peter on charges that included fraud, falsification of documents, and willful violation of building safety codes. The news sent shockwaves through the construction industry and earned Ethan more respect from his peers. On the personal side, Ethan found a new apartment in a modern building downtown, not far from his children's school. He began to reorganize his life, joining a book club and attending occasional community events. Instead of rushing to start a new relationship, he focused on his own growth and rebuilding his relationship with his children. Matthew and Noah stay at Ethan's new home a couple days a week. At first, the arrangement was somewhat awkward and unnatural. but over time they grew accustomed to the new family dynamic. Matthew, in particular, has seen a remarkable improvement in his relationship with his father. "I thought you'd hate me," Matthew snapped one night while they were stargazing together on Ethan's balcony. "Forever choosing Peter over you." "I never hated you, Matthew," Ethan said sincerely. "You were caught up in the complexities of the adult world and didn't know how to cope. It's not your fault." "But I hurt you," Matthew insisted. "I saw the look on your face when you left. That pain I caused." Ethan turned to his son with a serious but gentle expression. "Matthew, my job as a father is not just to support you when you do the right thing, but to understand and forgive you when you make mistakes. That's what unconditional love means." Matthew's eyes glistened with tears. "I can see why Mom says you're a good person. Even after doing all that, you still respected her and didn't speak ill of her in front of us. Because no matter what happens, she'll always be your mother," Ethan explained, "and I don't want the problems between us to affect your relationship with her." "Peter's not like that," Matthew said thoughtfully. "When things start to go bad, he immediately starts blaming everyone else, especially Mom. He said if it wasn't for her, he wouldn't have been distracted and investigated." Ethan didn't comment, just nodded and let his son continue. "That's when I realized," Matthew continued, "that he never really cared about us, or Mom. We're just tools for his self-gratification. And you, no matter how bad it gets, always put us first. That's a real father." Ethan was deeply moved by these words. Despite all this pain and turmoil, his son was still able to see the truth and learn from it, which is the greatest comfort. On the other side, Audrey is going through her own transformation. After losing Peter's support and the recognition of her social circle, she returned to the essence of her art. No longer seeking commercial success and external affirmation, she began to create work that was more authentic and personal. Surprisingly, these works have instead gained more sincere appreciation and recognition. One day, Ethan receives an invitation from Audrey to visit her new exhibition. Out of respect for the past, he accepted the invitation. The exhibition was held in a small but high-quality gallery with a small but attentive audience. Audrey's new work is a radical departure from his previous style, no longer the kind of decorative works created to appeal to specific tastes, but paintings filled with real emotion and introspection. One in particular caught Ethan's attention. It was a canvas split in half, with a broken family photo on one side and a fragment under repair on the other, with a visible crack in the center, but with golden lines around the crack connecting the two sides, as if mending a broken relationship. "It's gold repair," Audrey explained as she walked over to Ethan. "A Japanese art form where gold is used to repair broken pottery so that the scars become part of the beauty, rather than trying to hide them." Ethan understands the meaning of the piece, repairing rather than covering up. "Exactly," Audrey nodded. "I wanted to convey that even when a relationship breaks down and the damage has been done, beauty and growth can still be found in it. It's not about going back to the past. It's about creating a new and potentially more rewarding relationship." "Is this how you feel right now?" Ethan asked. "Yes," Audrey replied honestly. "I don't expect us to go back to the way things were, but I do hope that we can find a new way of being together for the sake of the kids and for our own inner peace." Ethan gazed at the painting and felt a mixture of emotions come over him. He no longer loves Audrey, at least not in the way a husband does his wife. The wounds of betrayal are too deep to fully heal. But he does respect her efforts to rebuild her life and cherishes the family they created together, even though that family now exists in a different form. "I think we're on that path," he said eventually. "Not to rebuild old bridges, but to build new passages." A year later, life has found a new balance. Peter Callahan was convicted of multiple offenses, including fraud and building safety code violations, and sentenced to 5 years in prison and a substantial fine. His business empire collapsed, and the once glamorous projects were either sold to other developers or stopped forever. Audrey continues her art with a more mature and authentic style. She maintains a friendly but distant relationship with Ethan, centered around the children's needs and scheduling. She occasionally dates, but is in no rush to start a new serious relationship and seems more focused on personal growth and relationships with her children. Ethan received a promotion on the job and became a senior inspector for the Regional Building Safety Authority. His professionalism and firm stance on violations earned him widespread respect. In his personal life, he starts dating a school counselor named Claire. She is a gentle and understanding woman who respects his past and relationship with his ex-wife and children. Matthew and Noah are also adjusting to the new family dynamic. Matthew is about to graduate high school, has been accepted to several good colleges, and plans to study business management. But unlike before, he says he hopes to contribute to construction safety and ethical business practices in the future. Noah, on the other hand, continued to develop his artistic talents, but unlike his mother, he favored design and practical art. One warm spring afternoon, the whole family, including Ethan, Audrey, the two sons, Eleanor, and even Claire, gathered to celebrate Matthew's 18th birthday. Despite some initial awkwardness, the atmosphere became relaxed and cozy as time went on. As the cake is served and the crowd surrounds Matthew, Ethan realizes that despite the pain and changes they've gone through, they're still somehow a family. Not a family in the traditional sense, but a network of mutual respect, understanding, and new connections. "I'd like to propose a toast." Matthew stood and raised his glass. "To family, no matter the form. To honesty and courage, no matter the cost. To growth and understanding, no matter how hard the road." Everyone raised their glasses, including Ethan and Audrey, and their eyes met briefly. And in that moment, there was no resentment, no bitterness, only a calm acceptance of a shared experience. That night, when Ethan returned to his apartment and stood on his balcony looking at the stars in the night sky, he remembered the lessons that painful experience had taught him. The hurt of betrayal remained, but it no longer dominated his life. Instead, it became a source of strength, a bedrock of wisdom, a reminder to value authentic relationships and maintain his integrity, no matter what the cost. The man who once walked into a room and found his family and close friends betraying him now stands, scarred but stronger, wiser, and calmer. Life didn't turn out the way he planned, but it gave him the possibility of a deeper, truer happiness, a happiness built on a solid foundation after weathering the storm. Through Ethan's story, we see that when boundaries are crossed and trust is betrayed, pain is inevitable. But just as inevitably, if we choose to face these challenges with honesty, dignity, and compassion, we will eventually find new balance, new meaning, and perhaps even new happiness. The price of crossing the line is heavy, but how we pay that price and how we recover and grow from it ultimately defines us. Under the starlight, Ethan breathed deeply and welcomed tomorrow, a tomorrow that was different from what he had once imagined, but still full of hope and possibility. That's the end of today's story. For more captivating tales, hit subscribe and never miss an episode.